6 a.m. My phone was buzzing on the nightstand, Dad flashing on the screen. I was still half asleep in a Chicago hotel room when his voice came through, low, urgent. "Lena, your restaurant's on the morning news. They're saying it's shutting down. Are you okay? This is exactly why you need a real job." I glanced out the window, sunrise spilling gold across the skyline, and smiled. "Dad, that headline, I wrote it." There was a pause, the kind where you can practically hear someone frowning. "You, what?" I leaned back, took a breath. "It's not closing because it failed. It's closing because I'm expanding. And that news crew outside, I invited them." Before he could ask anything else, I added, "But if you want to understand why, I need to tell you the story of how I let this whole family believe I was failing on purpose for 8 years. I grew up in New Orleans, in a family where food was more than what we ate. It was how we showed love, how we celebrated, and sometimes how we argued. My dad ran a little corner diner, the kind with faded leather booths, a chalkboard menu, and a bell over the door that jingled every time a regular walked in. He knew everyone's order before they even sat down. For me, that place was magic. Then Hurricane Isaac hit. The storm tore through the neighborhood, and the water didn't just flood the floors, it swallowed our future. A bad business loan finished what the storm started. One day we were serving breakfast to the same neighbors we'd known for years. The next, we were handing the keys to the bank. From that moment on, my parents believed restaurants were a one-way ticket to debt. To them, owning a kitchen was like walking blindfolded toward a cliff. So years later, when I told my dad I wanted to be a chef, he didn't yell. He just gave me this long, heavy look and said, "Lena, cooking's fine for a hobby, but you need a real career, something with a paycheck every 2 weeks." To him, working in someone else's kitchen was survival, owning one, suicide. And whether he meant to or not, he planted a seed, a deep, unshakable fear that I might be chasing something destined to fail. For years, my family thought I was barely scraping by. Double shifts in hot, noisy kitchens, a tiny apartment above a laundromat, an old car that coughed every time I turned the key. And honestly, I let them think that. It was easier than trying to explain what I was really building, because every time I even hinted at a bigger plan, I got the same dismissive wave. The same, "That's not how the real world works, Lena." So I played the part. I skipped family trips, claiming I couldn't get time off. I dodged questions about money. When they asked how work was going, I'd shrug and say, "Busy." They didn't know that while they pictured me sweating over a stove for someone else's dream. I was flying to California to meet my mentor. That I was studying supplier contracts instead of scrolling social media. That every extra dollar I made was going into a business no one knew existed yet. I lived small on purpose, not because I had to, but because I needed to keep my real moves under the radar. And then, one quiet morning at 6 a.m., all that secrecy turned into the headline my dad couldn't stop talking about. It was just past 6 in the morning when my phone lit up again with Dad. I was in Chicago for a meeting later that day, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, half awake. "Lena," he said, his voice tight, "I'm watching the morning news. Morale's Table, your restaurant, they're saying it's shutting down. The reporters outside, there's a sign on the door. Honey, is everything okay?" I could practically hear the "I told you so" hiding behind his concern. "I knew this would happen," he went on. "Restaurants eat people alive. This is why you need something steady. Come home, regroup." I let him talk, staring out at the Chicago skyline, sunlight just catching the tops of the buildings, and then I smiled. "Dad, that headline you saw, I wrote it." There was a pause. "You what?" "It's not closing because it failed. It's closing because I'm expanding. And that news crew outside, I invited them." He didn't say anything right away, just breathed, waiting for the rest. And that's when I knew it was finally time to tell him everything I'd kept hidden for 8 years. But before I could explain the rebrand, I had to tell him about the day a dare changed my life. and handed me the keys to everything I have now. 8 years earlier, my best friend dared me to enter a national cooking competition. I almost didn't. I told her I didn't have the time, the money, or the resume. She told me I had no excuse. So one rainy Tuesday, I walked into a massive convention center in Dallas, knife roll in hand, heart pounding hard enough to hear in my ears. The air smelled like seared steak and citrus. Cameras followed the competitors as we plated dish after dish under blinding lights. But by the final round, I was running on adrenaline and stubbornness. My last plate hit the judge's table with seconds to spare, a blackened Gulf snapper with charred okra and lemon butte blanc. When they called my name as the winner, I didn't even hear it at first. My friend was screaming in my ear, and suddenly there was a check for $250,000 in my hand, and a promise, a full year of mentorship from one of the most respected chefs in the country. That year changed everything. I didn't just learn how to cook for fine dining. I learned how to design menus that could win awards, how to negotiate supplier contracts so tight they'd make Wall Street jealous, how to run a kitchen like a general runs a war room. 2 years later, those lessons became Morale's Table, not a cozy little cafe, but a flagship restaurant built for something far bigger than anyone, including my parents, could imagine. 2 years after that competition, I opened Morale's Table in the heart of the French Quarter, not as a cozy little mom and pop, but as a fine dining flagship with polished brass, marble-topped bars, and a reservation list booked solid for months. Opening night felt like stepping onto a stage I'd been building in secret. The air was thick with the smell of rosemary and charred citrus. Waiters glided between tables like clockwork, and the soft hum of jazz from a corner trio wrapped the whole room in New Orleans warmth. But Morale's Table wasn't the end game. It was the launch pad. While the dining room was winning awards and pulling in critics, the real work was happening behind the scenes. Every dollar we made went somewhere deliberate, into buying a small food production facility where we bottled our signature sauces, into developing an online cooking school that brought in 6 figures its first year, into building systems so tight that one day I could walk away from the line and still have the kitchens run flawlessly without me. I kept my apartment small, my car simple, my public image quiet. I didn't want competitors, or even potential investors, to see how far ahead I was already playing. So when I finally invited my parents to see what I'd built, I didn't take them to my apartment. I took them to a place that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about me. A week after that early morning phone call, I flew home to New Orleans. Instead of meeting at my apartment like we usually did, I asked my parents to meet me at a surprise location. When they pulled up, my dad's first words were, This isn't a restaurant." He was right. Towering in front of us was a gleaming 2-story building with floor-to-ceiling glass and the words Morale's Culinary Headquarters in brushed steel above the entrance. Inside, I walked them through the lobby, past a wall of framed press clippings, into our open-concept test kitchen, where a team of chefs in crisp white jackets plated new creations under studio lights. The air smelled like fresh herbs and slow-braised short ribs. Next, I took them to the bottling line, rows of gleaming machinery filling jars of our signature Creole bourbon sauce, labels rolling out in perfect alignment. Forklifts moved pallets destined for grocery stores in 30 states. We stopped by the corporate offices, where our marketing team was editing a commercial set to air nationally. My mom just stood there, shaking her head like she was trying to wake up from a dream. By the time we circled back to the lobby, my dad wasn't asking questions anymore. He was just looking around. "You built all this, and we had no idea." "Because I wanted you to see it," I said. "Not just hear about it. I wanted you to walk through the place and feel what I've been building. And in that moment, for the first time, my dad didn't warn me about failure. He admitted he'd been wrong. We stood in the lobby, sunlight streaming through the glass, reflecting off the brushed steel letters above the reception desk. For a moment, my dad just stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Lena," he said slowly, "I'm proud of you, really proud. I was wrong about the way I saw your life." It hit me harder than I expected. All those years of quiet, calculated moves. All those conversations I'd cut short because I didn't want another lecture. And here he was, admitting he'd misjudged me. We sat down in one of the glass-walled conference rooms overlooking the test kitchen. My mom was still flipping through a glossy investor deck one of my team had handed her. She looked up, eyes shining, and said, "We had no idea, honey, no idea." I smiled. That's because every time I tried to tell you, the conversation shifted to when I'd get a real job, so I stopped trying. I figured one day I'd show you instead. My dad nodded, almost to himself. "Guess you just did." And over dinner that night, I told them exactly where Morale's dining group was going next, and it made that morning's headline look small. That evening, instead of taking my parents to my flagship restaurant in the French Quarter, I brought them to a quiet little place I'd bought in cash 6 months earlier. No press, no investors, just a dimly lit corner booth and the smell of freshly baked bread drifting from the kitchen. Over dessert, my dad leaned back, still processing the day. "So, what's next? You've already got more than most people could dream of." I smiled, not because I'd reached the top, but because I knew I hadn't even touched it yet. Next year, Morale's dining group launches in New York, Miami, and Austin. After that, London. I want our food to carry the flavors of home to people all over the world. My mom reached across the table, her hand warm over mine. "Then this time," she said, "we want to hear every step of the journey, no more guessing." I nodded. "Deal. Success is sweeter when you can share it." We stepped outside into the warm New Orleans night, the glow of the restaurant sign casting gold over the sidewalk. My dad glanced up at it, then back at me. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think running a restaurant was a dead end. Turns out it was your runway." Closing line, and standing there under that sign, I knew the runway was just getting longer.